everyone, my name is Amy Paine and I'm a lecturer in the School of Psychology at Cardiff University, where I'm based at the Cardiff University Centre for Human Developmental Science. So I'm really pleased to be contributing to this ExChange Wales conference series, where today I'm going to be talking about understanding the support needs of children adopted from public care with findings from the Wales Adoption Cohort Study. But before I begin, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the families who have really generously given their time to this study over the years. And I also want to acknowledge and thank the many people who have contributed to the work that I'm going to be sharing today, particularly the principal investigator of the Wales Adoption Cohort Study, Professor Catherine Shelton, and the director of the Neurodevelopment Assessment Unit, Professor Stephanie Verhoeven. So I'd also like to acknowledge and thank our funders who have supported this research. So in line with the theme of this conference of transitions for young people, I'm going to be presenting findings from the Wales Adoption Cohort Study, which is an ongoing project that's been running since 2015. And our primary aim has been to increase understanding of the factors that support successful outcomes for children adopted from care in Wales in the years following placement with their family. So in this presentation, I'm going to start with some background on this topic before describing the Wales Adoption Cohort Study. And I'm going to be sharing some of our most recent findings from this project regarding adopted children's mental health problems over time from early to middle childhood. And I'm going to be talking about risk and protective factors that we have found that influence children's development of mental health problems. And finally, I'll go on to talk about some of our latest studies where we've been looking to profile systems and processes that might help us to better understand the nature of adopted children's mental health. So for some background, most adopted children in the UK are taken into local authority care due to maltreatment experienced within the birth family. But adopted children's early experiences vary hugely. So some might have experienced prenatal adversity such as substance use, stress, or poor nutrition in utero. They might have a greater risk, a genetic risk for mental health problems. They might have experienced early adversity at an early stage of life, for example, maltreatment, neglect, household dysfunction, or unstable living arrangements. And children in care might also experience some interim stability if placed with foster parents or in temporary kinship care, and some might experience multiple moves between households. But all children who are removed from their birth families experience some loss of their families, friends, possessions, and community. So adoption as an intervention greatly improves the outcomes of the most vulnerable of children. But children placed for adoption quite often have experienced a cluster of these early adversities, and particularly if they're older at the time of their adoption. And this accumulation of adversities places them at greater risk for experiencing psychological and behavioural difficulties that can endure through childhood and into later life. Now, although research shows that adopted children might be at greater risk for developmental difficulties, it also shows that the majority are actually well adjusted, which is why identifying not only factors that place some children at greater risk of developing problems, but also the factors that help us to understand what protects children against the development of psychological and behavioural problems. So one protective factor that we're particularly interested in is adoptive parents' warm parenting, or parenting that is responsive, nurturing and sensitive. So warm parenting has been shown to mitigate negative effects of early adversity on child development and is also associated with positive outcomes for adopted children. And it's also suggested that parenting sets the emotional tone of the parent-child relationship, and also that warm parenting might positively affect a child's outcomes by socializing positive behavior that helps to foster their cognitive abilities, their capacity for self-regulation, and their social skills that then the child can generalize to their other relationships. So children adopted from the public care system are likely to have experienced a cluster of interrelated risk factors that could place them on a trajectory of mental health problems that could persist through childhood and into later life. But we know comparatively quite little about the factors that might buffer or attenuate these relationships between early adversity and children's mental health. So in one of our studies, we were interested in charting children's mental health over time. And we investigated the effect of early adversity on children's mental health trajectories. And we wanted to find out whether warm parenting buffers the impact of early adversity on children's mental health across development. So we investigated these questions by harnessing data from the Wales Adoption Cohort Study, which uses a prospective, longitudinal, mixed methods approach to develop understanding of the early support needs and experiences of 96 families who adopted children between 2014 and 2015. And these 96 families were followed up longitudinally over 5 time points post-placement. And baseline information about pre-placement experiences were collected from child adoption reports. So the first study I'm going to describe focuses on questionnaire follow-ups that were conducted at the 5, 21, and 36-month follow-ups. And in terms of sample characteristics regarding the children, we had a fairly even distribution of males and females. The mean age at placement was 2.36 years. About 41% were removed at birth. Children had spent a mean of 523 days with their birth parents and 537 days in care. 29 of the children were adopted as part of a sibling group. So for this study, rather than relying on one indicator of pre-adoptive risk, we used a data reduction technique to create a general index of children's exposure to pre-placement risk factors that are known to be associated with adverse outcomes in childhood. And so the variables that contributed to this risk index included age at placement, number of days in care, and number of adverse childhood experiences, such as childhood abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, parental separation, substance use, alcohol use, mental illness, or incarceration. And in terms of parent characteristics, the adoptive families in the study were a mean age of 40 at the time of adoption, and the majority were white British. Most parents were in a relationship and 13% were single adopters. And at the first questionnaire time point in the study, most informants were either in full-time work or part-time paid work. And gross family income and education levels were found to be higher than UK average compared to Office for National Statistics data at the same year. So at each time point of the study, families completed a questionnaire concerning socio-demographic information, pre- and post-adoption experiences, child and parent mental health, and reports on adoptive family relationships. So the main measures that we're using in the following study are reports of children's emotional or internalizing problems, or behavioural or externalizing problems. We also had parents' ratings of parent-to-child warmth, for example, asking questions about whether they act loving and affectionate towards their child or tell them that they love them. So focusing on parents' reports of children's emotional and behavioural problems rated using the child behaviour checklist, we charted patterns of change in adopted children's outcomes as a function of their age. So in line with numerous population studies, we found that adopted children's emotional and behavioural problems showed non-linear trajectories of change over time. So children displayed an accelerated increase of emotional and behavioural problems that levelled off just before and during the transition to the school years. When we added children's pre-adoptive adversity according to the risk index into the models, we found that higher scores of risk were associated with higher initial emotional problem scores. And furthermore, pre-adoptive risk was also associated with differences in the rate of change of emotional problems over time. So we found that children who experience less pre-adoptive adversity were more likely to have a de-escalation of emotional problems across childhood, as you can see from the descending blue line in the figure on the left here. And in our investigations of parental warmth, we found that parents' reports of warmth towards their child had a marked effect on both children's emotional and behavioural problems over time. And you can see here from the red lines in the diagrams, the children of adoptive parents who reported exceptionally high warmth towards their child consistently showed fewer emotional and behavioural problems over time. And these findings, therefore, showed that fostering exceptionally warm parenting through intervention could be a valuable way to promote positive outcomes for adopted children. Now, although we didn't find that parental warmth significantly attenuated or buffered the impact of early adversity on adopted children's mental health, our results did follow the expected pattern that parental warmth had a protective role for those who had experienced the highest levels of risk. So we did also take into consideration the possibility of reciprocal effects, insofar that it could be that a child's behaviour might be associated with the degree of warmth a child then reports towards them, as a child's emotional and behavioural problems are known to elicit low warmth from parents. Quite surprisingly, we found no conclusive evidence that children's emotional and behavioural problems at 5 months post-adoptive placement influenced adoptive parents' reports of warmth at the 21-month post-placement. So it's quite possible that because this sample of adoptive parents are well-educated, high SES, and they've been thoroughly screened prior to adoption, they might have more to draw on in terms of resources to deal with the challenges encountered in parenting. As a result, their parenting may be less affected by their child's early symptomology. It's also quite possible that the sample size in this study limited our ability to detect this association. So bidirectional relationships between parenting and child behaviour is a key question that we plan to return to in the future. So our findings corroborate earlier evidence showing that pre-adoptive risk factors are associated with poorer outcomes for adopted children, and that warm parenting might be associated with fewer child emotional problems and behavioural problems. Now, we extend these findings by showing the effect of these risk and protective factors on children's trajectories of problems across key developmental transitions in childhood. So evidence from our own studies and those of other authors suggests that adopted children have elevated rates of emotional and behavioural problems that can endure into the years following placement with their family. However, how can we begin to generate better understanding of the processes and systems that might underpin a child's mental health problems? So the RDoC is a research framework that we can use to investigate mental disorders. And the goal of this approach is to better understand the nature of mental health and illness by examining varying degrees of dysfunction and different psychological and behavioural systems. And this approach isn't intended to replace diagnostic systems or to be a diagnostic guide, but it has many advantages for understanding disorder. So by taking this approach, it's possible to investigate different domains where children have strength and where children may have some difficulties. And if we're to establish better understanding of early detection and intervention for children's difficulties to help offset risk trajectories before disorder emerges, then examining adopted children's neuropsychological profiles across a range of domains in relation to their emotional and behavioural problems earlier in childhood is needed. So the RDoC approach is harnessed in the Neurodevelopment Assessment Unit based in the Centre for Human Developmental Science at the School of Psychology at Cardiff University. At the centre, the team investigates emotional, cognitive and social processes involved in developmental problems in children. So the primary aim of the Neurodevelopment Assessment Unit is to collect broad assessment data on primary school age children between the ages of 4 and 7 with diverse developmental problems. And this will enable the development of understanding of overlapping cognitive and social emotional bases of different profiles of children with neurodevelopmental problems. And just to share a little bit about how the centre works, I'm just going to share a quick video.
Here at Cardiff University, at the Neurodevelopment Assessment Unit, or NDAO for short, we are interested in understanding the emotional, behavioural and social difficulties that some young children may experience. Children aged between 4 and 7 years can be referred to the NDAO by their school teachers if the teachers would like to know more about any difficulties a child may have across a range of skills and abilities that are important for learning and behaviour. Each child and their parent will visit us here in the NDAO for an assessment, and the results of the assessment are fed back to the school with the aim of shaping the support that the school provides. In this video, we are going to show you what happens during a visit to the NDAO so that you know what to expect during your visit. When you visit the unit, a member of our team will welcome you and explain what you'll be doing on the day. They will also answer any questions that you may have. Children who visit us will take part in a series of games, puzzles and activities in our specially designed research room. They will do lots of different activities. Each activity has been designed with children in mind. There are activities on the computer, there are games with toys, there are puzzles on a tablet, and we will also be doing some activities using books or by asking questions. So there will be lots of things to do, and most children enjoy doing these activities. We use the tasks so we can find out more about the different skills and abilities that a child has. For example, their memory, language, attention, and emotions. While the child is doing the activities, the parent will be in another room nearby, answering some questionnaires about the child's development, emotions, and behaviour. At the end of your visit, we will also ask you whether you would like to be invited to take part in other studies in the future. The information that we collect during your visit will be brought together in the form of a report. We send this report back to the teachers at your child's school. This will help the teachers to understand better why some children have difficulties at school, and it may help shape the support that children receive at school. Every child who visits us for an assessment receives a small present as a way of saying thank you for working so hard before they go back home. If you would like to know more or have any other questions, please phone us on 02920 870 354 or send an email to ndao@cardiff.ac.uk.
So at the end, our children complete a wide range of assessments, and each assessment captures different psychological constructs that are derived from the RDoC framework, and they're believed to be important for children's learning and development. So some of the assessments include facial emotion recognition, theory of mind, working memory, cognitive flexibility, and sustained attention. So we collaborated with the NDAO to profile areas of neurocognition in a sample of children adopted from the UK public care system. And our aims were to profile children's emotional and behavioural problems at home and at school, and their performance on a range of neurocognitive tasks, including verbal and non-verbal reasoning, receptive vocabulary, inhibitory control, cognitive flexibility, and episodic memory, and comparing their scores to general population scores. We were also interested in investigating associations between children's performance on neurocognitive tasks and their emotional and behavioural problems, and associations with age at placement. So we hypothesised that adopted children would have elevated emotional and behavioural problems. And in line with previous research, we expected for them to show delays in both global measures of intellectual ability and in specific domains of neurocognitive functioning. Although, as we hypothesized, children in our sample had more emotional and behavioral problems than the general population, we did find that as a sample, children's average performance on the neurocognitive tasks was not lower than population norms. So the results indicated that for most of the children, their overall standardized scores were within the average range. However, there were also areas of cognitive performance where some children scored much lower than population norms. And these results included lower memory scores for 21% of the children, lower vocabulary and cognitive flexibility scores for 26% of children, lower inhibitory control scores for 39% of the children, and 41% of the children scored below average on non-verbal reasoning tasks. And children who scored low on the non-verbal reasoning tasks were more likely to have more parent and teacher rated behavioural problems. And children's performance on inhibitory control and cognitive flexibility were associated with parent-rated behavioural problems. So children who were older at the time of their adoptive placement also had lower non-verbal reasoning scores, indicating that this might be a particular area of need for children who might have experienced a greater accumulation of pre-placement risk factors such as early adverse experiences and multiple moves in care. So in another study, another key domain of interest was children's ability to recognise emotions. So impaired facial emotion recognition is a transdiagnostic risk factor for a range of psychiatric disorders, as understanding emotions is fundamental to effective social relationships and psychological adjustment. It usually includes two major processes. The first is discrimination accuracy, and this refers to the ability to correctly identify emotions. And the other is response bias, and this indicates where there might be a tendency to attribute emotions in the absence of the concordant cues associated with that emotion. So for example, mistakenly identifying non-hostile, ambiguous or neutral expressions as angry. And this can potentially reveal patterns of errors in children's attributions of emotions. So early family environment plays an important role in the development of how children perceive emotion. So from the perspective of early adversity, children who have experienced adverse rearing conditions might have different profiles of recognition, accuracy, and bias. So for example, children who experience few opportunities for emotional learning in, for example, neglectful rearing conditions might show greater difficulty in discriminating emotional facial expressions. But the family environment offered by adoptive parents, we know, is an influential factor in a child's psychological adjustment. So adoptive family life that's characterized by warmth might provide children with more opportunities to make sense of the social world and explore both positive and negative emotions in a safe context. So we investigated adopted children's ability to recognize emotions in addition to the relationship with their pre-adoptive adverse experiences and post-adoptive parental warmth. So in this study, 42 adopted children completed an emotion recognition task in the Neurodevelopment assessment unit, as did a comparison group of children living with their birth families, who were matched to the adopted group by age, sex, and teacher-rated total difficulties as per the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire. And we compared adopted children's emotion recognition to non-adopted children who were at similar risk of future psychopathology, with the view to better understand the impact of early adversity and adoptive experience on children's emotion recognition skills. And for the adopted children only, we also investigated their emotion recognition skills in relation to their histories of early adversity based on the number of adverse childhood experiences. And we also investigated whether their emotion recognition skills were associated with parent and teacher ratings of children's emotional and behavioural problems. So we found that adopted children showed significantly worse facial emotion discrimination accuracy of sad and angry faces than non-adopted children. And adopted children's discrimination accuracy of scared and neutral faces were negatively associated with parent-reported behavioural problems, and discrimination accuracy of angry and scared faces was associated with parent and teacher-reported emotional problems. Contrary to our expectations, children who experienced more recorded pre-adoptive early adversity, so more ACEs, were more accurate in identifying negative emotions, namely sadness and fear. And it's quite possible that children who experience more pre-adoptive negative emotional situations might have a greater sensitivity to the perception of negative emotions. And this might have presented an adaptive benefit when children resided in an adverse environment. However, we do need more work to understand this, for example, in larger samples, and also where we have the severity, duration, and type of early adverse experience recorded. So we were interested in the role that parental warmth might play in relation to children's emotion recognition skills. So in this study, we assessed adoptive parental warmth by coding the parent's speech about their child in a 5-minute speech sample, where parents were asked to describe their child's personality and their relationship for 5 minutes. So parents' expressions of warmth were coded based on the content of the sample and the tone of voice they used when describing their child. And we found that warm adoptive parenting indicated from this speech sample was associated with fewer child behavioural problems and a lower tendency for children to incorrectly identify faces as angry. And this might suggest that warm parenting might provide children with a safe emotional climate by which to experience and understand both positive and negative emotions. So to summarise these findings, by adopting the RDoC approach, we've assessed adopted children across multiple domains of development to better understand their areas of strength and difficulty. And we found difficulty in cognitive and social tasks are associated with children's emotional and behavioural problems. So this methodology brings the potential of taking an individualised approach to investigating and potentially targeting specific domains for early intervention and prevention before psychiatric and academic problems might emerge. Our findings also show that pre- and post-adoption prevention and intervention strategies that place emphasis on supporting warm parenting are a promising avenue for improving adopted children's mental health outcomes. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for listening, and I'd like to share some of the publications I've spoken about in this presentation today, and also some others from the Wales Adoption Cohort Study. All these publications are freely available via open access, but I've also included my email address here in case you'd like me to send you any publications of interest, or if you have any questions. Thank you very much.